Well, first, Celinda, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this evening. It is a privilege to welcome you to our first event for Blue Wave NJ's at-home speaker series. I also want to welcome all of our members that are participating tonight. If you want to ask a question during Celinda's presentation, please write it in the chat Q&A session. You see Q&A at the bottom, and we will answer it after her presentation. Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, serving as senior advisor to the National Party and its committees and to dozens of Democratic incumbents and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. I have heard her present poll results several times, and I have always looked forward to it. She has also worked over the years for many progressive national nonprofits, unions, and foundations. Celinda and her firm are known for cutting-edge research on issues from the economy to healthcare, the environment, and education. Celinda, recent polls appear to be more favorable to Democrats than those taken in the pre-pandemic period, or even those conducted earlier in the crisis when President Trump was given, some time to show his leadership and lack thereof. The Senate now could be in play, according to recent polls, and Democrats are looking good in Arizona, Maine, Colorado, Montana, and even North Carolina, and even in a couple of other states. Biden is also leading in many swing states, and according to his staff, he's going on the offensive. But as 2016 painfully illustrated to all of us, we cannot become complacent. Polls can change, and they can at times mislead. There are many risks, and not the least being voter turnout and voter suppression, especially during this pandemic. We do not want another Wisconsin primary across the entire U.S. So given the importance of this election, how do we make sure we win in the time of Corona, and what should be our winning message? Thanks again for coming and talking to us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you are doing. And I particularly in what is really part of the center of the pandemic in New Jersey, and all of you must be profoundly affected. So I hope everyone stays as well and as healthy as possible. And it's a very fast changing environment. It's a good time for pollsters because the environment is changing all the time. So you need lots of polling. And it turns out people are very responsive to polls. People are picking up our phones and answering our polls faster than we've ever had before. But I'm going to give you a very quick tour of the landscape. And in all cases, all of the data that I'm going to show you is available to you. And I'm glad to take questions at the end of the presentation, and very glad to have this be part of an ongoing conversation. And New Jersey is leading the way in many, many progressive policies. So I look forward to working with all of you on that. So if we turn to the next slide, let's look first at the mood of the country and the political environment. If we look at the next slide, you'll see here this thing that looks like America going into cardiac arrest. Is America going into cardiac arrest? And you can see that people thought the country was going in the wrong direction for quite some time. And this is associated a little bit with partisanship. Right now, Republicans are more likely to think it's going in the right direction than Democrats. During 2012, Democrats were more likely to say right direction than Republicans. But in general, America really concerned about the direction of the country pre-pandemic, and now that sentiment has continued. The two top emotions that people are feeling is frustrated and anxious, and there's a very, very high level of anxiety right now. If we look at the next slide, you can see here President Trump's job approval. And his job approval is is solidly negative. His job approval on coronavirus, which I'll show you in a moment, is also solidly negative. And in fact, he was getting better marks on coronavirus, believe it or not. They've fallen, and now his overall job approval and his job approval on coronavirus has merged, and it's at a fairly low level. There's also a huge gender gap when it comes to Trump's job approval. Men approve of his job by 4 points. Women are like, are you absolutely insane? And disapprove of his job performance by 17 points. And that distinction in job performance, very, very strong among independents and also strong among Republicans, but heavily influenced by how much Fox you watch. So Fox does poison your mind, so be careful if you're watching it. And 31% of Republicans, largely Republican women, are not regular viewers of Fox, and they are much more negative toward the president than the people who are regularly viewing Fox. If we look at the next slide, you can see here just another way of looking at the data. This from the Navigator poll, which if you haven't signed on to it, is really, they are having daily updates of really comprehensive and good data on what's going on in terms of perceptions. But you see here again, the Trump's job performance solidly negative. It's really at a record low point. And the other thing that's very good is that independents are very negative about the job the president is doing. If we look at the next slide, you can see here other leaders in the world and on the left-hand side, and other leaders at different crisis points in the United States. And you can see that Trump got the least bump of any leader in the United States in terms of a crisis, and it diminished right away. That the Trump data is in that little corner, that the lower right-hand corner, and that little blip that you see was his pickup around Corona. On the left-hand side, you can see most leaders, France, Germany, Britain, Canada, Australia, all getting higher ratings than Donald Trump in terms of his job performance around the pandemic. So he got a little lift. It was very short-lived. It was nothing like what we had had in the past with other leaders, and nothing like what foreign leaders got for the most part. If we look at the next slide, you can see here his ups and downs in terms of coronavirus handling. And you can see he started out negative. And one of the biggest critiques that people have of his handling of corona is that he was too late to the game and that he was not prepared. And that has persisted as a critique of him. Then there was the rallying around the flag from about March 22nd to April 5th. And then it's solidly declined, and it's at record low levels now. And he's trying to turn people's focus to the economy, because the economy is the one area where he has positive job performance, and where he is the one thing that people think he might be better at is the economic part of the recovery, not the healthcare part, but the economic part of the recovery. So he's desperately, desperately trying to shift public attention. For Democrats, they're solidly focused on the healthcare. Republicans are solidly focused on the economy, and independents, who are actually more downscale than either Republicans or Democrats, are equally focused on both, but quite worried about the economy. And independents have one of the highest rates of unemployment right now. So very, very concerned about the economic recovery as well as health. That said, 2/3 of Americans still want social distancing, and 2/3 of Americans say they are more worried about opening too soon rather than not opening soon enough. If we look at the next slide, Here you see that top blue line is the rating for your state and local government, and the red line is your rating on COVID for Trump and the federal government. And across the board, people have consistently been giving their state and local governments higher ratings than Trump and the federal government. And that is particular, that gap has gotten even greater recently. We also see that in every single state, there's now a new poll that came out, the Intercept poll, that showed in all 50 states, the governors are rated higher than the president in terms of COVID performance. You can see down below some of the key swing states, and you can see that every place, the blue line stronger than the red line, whether you're talking about a Democratic governor or a Republican governor. People think their governors are doing much, much better jobs than they think that Trump is doing. Unfortunately, we have Florida, by the way, where we have one key state where the Republican governor is really validating Trump. And watch the Florida numbers. They're not listed here, but DeSantis getting mixed ratings and Trump getting mixed ratings, but they reinforce each other. Florida could come down to be one of the key states. It'll be a very, very important state to watch. Let's look at the next slide. And you see here, who do you trust most to handle COVID? This data changes very rapidly. And the most recent data, which just came out today, Biden is a little bit further ahead. He's about 7 points ahead. But Biden ahead of Donald Trump. What's really interesting is the data on the right-hand side. So if you're in a weak Clinton state, a state that voted 45 to 48% for Trump, you favor Biden today by 13 points. If you're in a toss-up state, you favor Biden by 10 points. And if you're in a weak Trump state, you favor Trump, but by only 3 points. So in the swing states, Biden is doing even better over Trump on COVID response. And this is one of the things that really has the potential to shift this election. You can tell that Trump is quite aware of it because he's engaged in 3 strong memes. One, blame someone else. The newest people being China and the conspiracy theory. 2, switch the attention to the economy. And 3, discredit Biden's leadership with this Sleepy Joe kind of social media that they're doing, that he's not up to the job, that he's too old, that he's beginning signs of dementia and senility. If we look at the next chart, let's look at now, if that's kind of the mood, how does it translate into the vote? And if we look at the next chart, you can see here, Biden is ahead of Trump. He's averaging about 6 to 7 points ahead in the national polling. In the battleground states, he's also ahead, including in some surprise states like Arizona and Florida. He's tied in Texas. But it's important for us to remember, and Marcia said it right, the notice that his advantage over Trump was greater at certain points in time than it is right now. So Trump is not down and out, and these people fight dirty and they fight ruthless. They're also trying to manipulate turnout, and I'm going to show you some slides on that in a moment. Turnout, a big, big issue for us and a big, big concern. If we look at the next chart, you can see the vote here by different demographics. One of the things that people are quite concerned about is the millennial vote. And they're worried that Biden didn't do well with millennials in the primary. And Biden, you know, an older candidate, would he have trouble with the millennials? And one of the things that people aren't factoring in enough is that millennials despise Donald Trump. Now, Trump won white millennials by 1 point in 2016, but they despise him now. And you can see, and the Gen Zers coming behind him are even stronger. So actually, Biden leads by more than 2 to 1 over Trump. And the key will be to make sure that the millennials turn out and to make sure in some key states like Michigan that they don't vote third party, and watch for Trump to keep pushing Amaj and other third party candidates. At the other end of the spectrum, we have seniors, and actually we are doing the best with seniors that we have done since before 2008. Obama was never very popular with seniors, and we can talk a lot about the factors of that, including race. Hillary Clinton, believe it or not, didn't do very well with seniors. We're doing quite well with seniors now. We're tied with seniors. And the seniors are really negative about Trump's reaction to COVID. We see again that gender gap. Men are voting 2 points for Trump. Women are voting 13 points for Biden. One of the biggest target votes will be married white women. What we have to do is make sure that married women do not vote the same way as their husbands. And it is already shaping up that this election looks like it could provide the grist for a record number of divorces. African American voters, extremely supportive of Biden, 80% support. Latino voters, we need to get this number up, and that is particularly true among Latino men. We are winning 51-34, but we need this number in like 65. And as you can tell, there are a lot of Latinos who are undecided. So this is a vote that needs to get improved. The more education you have, the less likely you are to vote for Donald Trump. And that has been a persistent trait. And it's true even within different racial and ethnic groups. If we look at the next slide, you can see here some key battleground states. Biden leads in Florida, leads in Pennsylvania, leads in Michigan, leads in Wisconsin. Of course, these are narrow leads. They're very dependent on who turns out to vote. And we've got a fight on our hands, but we'd rather be in our position than his position right now. If we look at the next slide, you can see, you all mentioned this already, the Senate is looking quite good as well. And there are a lot of close Senate races, and brand new data out of Montana that shows Bullock ahead of Daines by 6 points. You see the strong lead for Kelly in Arizona. North Carolina, very, very competitive, a huge undecided vote. And of course, it's not surprising they're doing everything they can to suppress the vote in North Carolina. So the Senate is really looking like we have some good opportunities there. And we could take back the Senate. If we look at the next slide, what are the issues that are on people's mind? And this is hard to measure right now, of course, because COVID is the #1 issue everywhere. But as we look, healthcare, extremely important to voters. Terrorism, still important, although less now than before. Gun policy was very important before COVID, has diminished. Education, a key state and local issue. My favorite meme from the COVID environment was the one with, you may have seen it, with the young woman who said, I'm a mother of 2 kids. I've been in homeschooling them for an hour and a half, and I think teachers ought to make $1 billion a year. But this is a very serious issue, actually, and moms are really, really concerned about at-home schooling and really want to invest in school. And then the economy has taken off. Immigration has diminished a little bit, except for Republicans. But immigration, the xenophobia and the racism, strategic racism, the dog whistle politics, obviously the administration is doing with China as well as immigration. In terms of choice, and some of the other issues, race relations, they're being pushed down, even though the administration is moving very aggressively on them during the COVID environment. And one of the things that we have to watch out for is that on so many issues, COVID is just drowning out the news conversation. It's not drowning out the interest that voters have in the issue, but it is drowning out their awareness of what's going on in terms of bans on abortion, turning back environmental regulations, suing still on ACA. This is all stuff that the public is largely unaware of because so much is going on for them. If we look at the next slide, you can see that COVID has really taken over people's focus. And in February, no one was focused on it. We weren't even asked about it. In March, government was, the issue ahead of it, and healthcare tied, and now COVID is everything. It is very much the prism through which people are viewing issues. If we look at the next slide, when people are asked who do they trust to handle a crisis, they trust Biden. But when they're asked who do you trust to handle the economy, this is the one thing that is giving Donald Trump oxygen. He is ahead on the economy by 11 points, and he is ahead on getting us back in the recovery. And there are some people that think you may need a businessman to get us back in the economy, and that's actually the ad that they just launched. And they ended it with the tag, it may not be the Washington way, it's Trump's way, but sometimes you need a different kind of leader. So they're really leaning in toward that. The other thing we have is that the Democrats have been behind on the economy for some time. We've been behind Republicans on the economy, and we need to get ahead on the economy. We need to establish an economic platform. This is a place where governors can really help our ticket, because governors have to have an economic plan, and they can add a lot of credibility where our party federally is just very weak on the economy right now, and weaker on it presidentially as well. If we look at the next slide, who do you think will make healthcare more affordable? Joe Biden and the Democrats. Who do you think will put the middle class first? Joe Biden and the Democrats. So there are avenues and entree points into the economy, healthcare, middle class. There is also a growing sentiment that voters have that maybe this recovery is going to be a lot better for the wealthy and big business than it's going to be for struggling and working families. And that's a divide that we really need to keep pushing, because that will help turn this economic strength that Donald Trump has into weakness. Yeah, we're recovering. He's good on the economy, but who's he good for is a question that we want to ask and really push. If we look at the next slide, you can see here how Trump's approval has changed over time. And also you can see again the coronavirus really being, and the economy, we're holding him up for a while. Now both have diminished, but his strength is still, relatively speaking, on the economy. Next slide. Then we asked people, how do you feel about the federal government's response to the financial crisis? And 63% approve of the federal government's response. One of the things that we're really interested in, and that I would really encourage all of us to think about, is how we can seize opportunity from the obviously very hard and tragic experience that we're going through. There are a number of attitudes where people are changing their minds, and a number of openings that we haven't had before. So for example, people are completely changing their mind on whether everybody needs health insurance. They definitely think that everyone needs at least emergency health care now. People are changing their minds about whether we can regulate the price of prescription drugs. They were already pretty supportive of it, but most people think they will not be able to afford more than $200 for the coronavirus vaccine, if that. And people think that the government should provide coronavirus vaccine for free and cut back on any price gouging that may occur, or escalation of price for the development. They're also getting the sense that the public money is playing a role in development of drugs. People see a much greater role for the economy in the government in the economy. And as you go on, we're just seeing people churning and developing new attitudes. And I think it's our job as Democrats to make sure that they're not short-term changes, that people actually see them as long-term changes. If we look at the next slide, what are elections going to look like? Well, it's a very complicated situation. People are very nervous about disruption of the elections, and Democrats are far less confident than Republicans that everyone will be able to vote. People support vote by mail, but they support it if it's mixed. They don't want to go to it all at once. And there are huge differences in our states. So states like Oregon, Washington, California, Montana, Colorado, very familiar with vote by mail or all vote by mail now, they're all gung-ho. Other states like Michigan, Ohio, that are much less familiar with it, it's very counterintuitive to them. We did some exploration and focus groups where people were saying things like, how will I get my ballot? Where will I send it? Do I post it in the mailbox? Do I drop it in a box? Do I give it to my mail carrier? Do I have to put postage on it? Does someone else have to witness it? So this whole vote by mail process in a lot of states, not that intuitive to voters. And we're going to have a major, major education job on our hands in the post-COVID environment. If we look at the next slide, we can see here that people much, much more supportive of vote by mail if it's in combination, if you have to give a reason, if you're permitted but not required. And Democrats wildly in favor of it, Republicans much more resistance. Those numbers on the right, 87% of Democrats allowing in favor of everyone being allowed to vote, only 49% of Republicans agreeing. If we look at the next slide, what is our electorate going to look like? This is the national electorate. It is the most diverse electorate we've ever had, but it is still an electorate that's going to be 67% white. So one of the things we have to do is we have to do persuasion and we have to do turnout. And there is a huge block of voters, white non-college educated voters, that we have to do better with than we did in 2016. If we look at the next slide, you see here generational change, and you see now projected for 2020 that the millennials and the boomers will be the same size. And if you add the Gen Zers, young voters will make up a higher proportion of eligible voters, not necessarily turned out voters, but eligible voters than the boomers do. If we look at the next slide, this is some data on New Jersey, but I realize we're coming up on time, so we'll just go through quickly these slides and you can have them as reference. This is stuff you know already. Biden doing quite well in New Jersey, and independents in New Jersey voting strongly for Biden. Democrats completely unified, but no defecting Republicans. If you're a Republican in New Jersey, believe it or not, this is a place where we thought we'd have some defecting Republicans, but we do not. If you look at the next slide, you can see here what the electorate is likely to look at. And in 2018 and 2014, you see the rising American electorate, young voters and people of color making up a higher proportion. You also see big differentials in terms of turnout. As you all know, New Jersey got a big turnout issue for the rising American electorate, or the new majority. If we look at the next slide, you can see Cory Booker doing quite well and leading solidly both opponents, Republican opponents who are not very well known. And if you look at the next slide, you see that in terms of statewide generic ballots, Democrats doing pretty well, ahead in the statewide ballot by 12 points. And the bars are a little distorted here, but it's only 1 point difference in terms of the congressional ballots. So a lot of toss-up races, a lot of close races, and turnout could be the key here. If we look at the next slide, you can see here that marijuana, people generally going to vote for it, although a little bit of mixture about whether this is a good or a bad idea. And a lot of mothers of young children actually being a target here, not as sure about whether marijuana is a gateway drug or not. So if you support the legalization of marijuana, those younger suburban moms are a key target for us to get solidly over the top on that issue. And last slide, just what do we need to do? We need to have turnout and persuasion. We need to make sure that Trump does not reduce this to the lesser of two evils. Although what's interesting in that regard, there were about 20% of the electorate in 2016 who didn't like either candidate, and they voted 22 points for Hillary Clinton. Today, they vote 10 points for Joe Biden. We got to make sure that we get the economy defined, and we got to make sure that we look at new ways of organizing: online, phone organizing, relational organizing, and trusted sources as sources of information in this very volatile environment. So we can talk more about that later, but let me turn it over to questions.
All right, Celinda, thank you very much. And if anyone would like the deck of slides, please contact us. I have a question from Bob Russo, who's teaching. He is a council person here in Montclair, and he's teaching at Montclair State. He said, how can I keep my students engaged and optimistic about their government and voting this year when they seem to think the future is not so positive?
You know, it's a very, very, very good question and a very, very big concern. We are, in fact, embarking Monday on a study of this, of the Gen Zers. We're that concerned about it. And for the millennials, this is the second time they perceive themselves to have gotten hit. So it's a big, big issue. It's a really good question. One of the things is to talk about making education available, and including expanding broadband and access to platforms. A second thing is to be aggressive about climate change. And particularly an investment in renewable energy and jobs. So kind of the Van Jones agenda, honestly, linking climate change to jobs. But the short answer is I don't have a very good answer right now. And one of the things, Marcia, that I'd be glad to do is when the study's completed, it'll probably be completed in a couple of weeks to a month, I'll be glad to send it to you, the public portion of it, and make sure you all get it, because it's something we're all very concerned about. Now, one thing we know is that young people are really, really listening to educators right now. So I'm glad that someone asked that who was an educator, who is an educator. You can make a big, big difference. Young people are really listening to educators right now.
Thanks. We would love to have the public report when it's done. Appreciate it. Another question was asked by Rick McGay. Do men and women differ on what issues are most important to them?
That's a really good question. Yes, they do. So men prioritize the economy, women prioritize healthcare, is the simplified version of it. And men are torn. They're hesitant to not shelter, but they are torn between health and the economy. Women are adamant, don't unshelter too fast. But the biggest thing is that women are the healthcare voters in this country, and 80% of the healthcare voters are women.
Yes, and healthcare is still a big issue, you're saying, this election, right?
Right, very much so. And a big issue for turnout as well as persuasion.
Okay, another question was on the environment. Why do most polls only ask about global warming when discussing the environment and not talk about water quality and air pollution?
Beats me, they should. And one of the things that's really frustrating to me, that I assume must be frustrating to the speaker as well, I think this administration is getting away with murder, really, in terms of loosening regulations. I think people would wildly oppose it, and there's not enough conversation about it. And I am sure that if we put water pollution and we put reducing pollution standards and toxic waste standards, etc., people would be wildly opposed to that. So it's really not getting asked enough, and there's just not enough conversation about it. And I completely agree with the person who asked that question.
Yes, so do I. Another question by Donna Pepe. Do you think the issues that have come into focus as a result of the pandemic, the greater toll taken on African Americans and Latinos, The fact that we're totally reliant on many hourly workers for our services who don't earn a living wage, and the inequities of the current healthcare system, to name a few, could be a lightning rod for the Democratic platform.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think these are really big, and voters are really, really responsive to them. And there is a phenomenal memo that I will send your way, written by a woman named Anat Shanker-Osario. She wrote a memo. She's been one of the driving forces of the race class narrative, calling out dog whistle politics and strategic racism. And some of you may have read Ian Haney Lopez's book, Dog Whistle Politics. There's a subsequent book to that. If Dog Whistle Politics provided the question, Merge Left provides part of the answer, and includes a lot of research that we were all involved in the race class narrative. Anyway, to make a long story short, Anat has written a really wonderful memo, and we will send it to you, on how to talk about some of these issues in the COVID environment and how to talk about COVID. Number one thing. Number two thing, people are really distressed about the racial inequities, and people are very aware now of a whole new definition of essential workers. We're also finding, ironically, that our best defense on immigration is that many immigrants are the essential workers. Yes, I think there are huge openings. I think it's a moral imperative. I think it's a way to push back on the dog whistle strategic racism that the administration is using. And I'd love to get you some resources to think about that more and how to talk about that more.
Well, the next question applies to Blue Wave and many other progressive groups. Typically, door-to-door canvassing and leafleting in public spaces has been a big part of helping turnout by all of us. What can we expect to do this year if the prevalence of COVID-19 continues for months and requires continued social distancing?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. It's a huge problem. And, we have, as we all know on this call, even in places like New Jersey, very uneven access to broadband. So even when we talk about going online to do some of this stuff, that's very uneven access. We're going to have to develop new ways of campaigning. And I think we're all inventing this right now. And we are going to have to also rely more on existing networks. One of the things we're really finding is trusted sources and trusted networks are really, really important. But, we don't know. And I think, with your long history of grassroots politics in New Jersey and Citizen Action and others, I think you all will be some of the people who will develop some of the best new ways. Someone I know many of us know and consider a friend, Bob Kramer, has been doing some very interesting webinars on how to campaign in the new era and developing new techniques. Some of the things we're finding that are just off the charts are town halls. People are really, really responding to online town halls. And again, anything that involves phoning right now is really getting a much, much better response than it used to get. But we have to reinvent this, and I really worry about who we're going to be missing.
As a background in economics, this next question is asked, would showing that the health of U.S. citizens has an impact on the economy work as a persuasive talking point? If you really want the economy to get back to work, right, and get started and grow,
yeah,
we need healthy citizens. Will that work?
Yeah.
Or will it not in your polling?
It works really well with Democrats, and it works better with women than with men.
Okay.
But I think it could be changing. I think that it could be working more and more. So the short answer is it works with our base, less well with the swing, but that may be changing.
All right. We have one more question here, and that's a question of healthcare affordability. We know it's important for for the US as a whole, how important is it in swing states, since swing states are the only ones that matter?
Yeah, it's important. Affordability is really important. And we need to remember to add into the equation prescription drugs. And I noticed that Trump is adding that into his ads, and some of the Republicans are adding it into their ads, ironically. And I know the pharmaceutical industry and prescription drugs is a complicated issue in New Jersey, but really, really strong in terms of an affordability component. And then people are really thinking about affordability and access to care. And this is a huge issue. The other issue that's very, very strong still and is pre-existing conditions. And we should not let that go. I mean, Trump doubled down again. He made a statement again today that he's going to sue ACA. And reframing that in terms of pre-existing conditions still works very, very strongly with the voters.
Okay, we will be doing pre-existing conditions as well as healthcare on our screens and on our social media this year. Thank you so much. I think that's the last question. We really appreciate it. For all our participants, if you would like a copy of the slide deck, we would be happy to give it to you. Let us know. Thank you, Celinda. And
thank you so much. And if anyone has questions later on, Marcia, if you want to push them our way, we'll answer them. And love to stay with you. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.